Hello, everyone. I'm Gabe Bulkowski. Season's greetings. Just recently, I did a webinar entitled Rollin Through the Holidays, where we started to talk about what discipline is and just how big a topic it is. Just as with anything, when you're studying from a place of mindfulness, just one word can spark just oodles of information and interest and study. So, first of all, what is discipline? Discipline is the ability to pick something up and put it back down at a desired interval and have it not interrupt any other part of your life. It's not a sprawling thing that just takes over your life, that where you're thinking about it in your spare time and maybe you're even thinking about it when you're doing other things. Having a proper discipline in place allows you to feel unburdened. It allows you to feel like you can get a thing done without it taking up as much space in your mind. The reason to put a discipline in place is because we know that the goal that we have is much greater than the amount of time we have each day. And we understand that only with a steady, consistent effort are we going to get to that goal, because otherwise it just doesn't work out. It creates too much stress and doesn't allow for us to have a life that feels full. A great way to think about this is the golden egg, the goose and the golden egg story. A person, without going into too much detail about the story itself, only gets one golden egg per day to allow for them to sustain themselves. And you can compare that to your practice very easily. You only get a set amount of time each day to work at this thing. And if you become, as in the story, a little bit greedy with how much you want to get out of that goose, you don't just want one egg, you want two eggs would really be very helpful. You start to stress the production capability and therefore stress the long-term sustainability of what you're trying to do. Okay, so how can discipline be useful to you? The most important thing that you can get before the holidays is clarity about what you plan to do. And the reason I say that is that we're all going to go into the holidays deciding either consciously or consciously how we're going to handle our practice. So we may as well be intentional about it the best way we can. Most of us have three possibilities for the holidays, and I'll list those momentarily. But first of all, I want to set up what I think to be mental health priorities. So it's first of all important to recognize that there are priorities that come before your playing. Whether or not that's how you have your life set up is a different story, but that generally speaking, I'm assuming that your sense of well-being in your body and mind is more important to you than getting your practice done. So that means first priority is taking care of your body. Next priority is being with friends and family and being around people who care about you, whether or not you're good at what you do. Having established that, here are three possibilities for this coming season. The first one is that you take a break, that you decide that you are going to consciously allow yourself to place something that you've been doing for a long time off to the side and risk forgetting about it. The second one, you're going to ramp up your playing. You're going to use the spare time that you have in the holidays to spend more time with this thing that you've been working so hard to get good at. And you're going to see if that can get your playing better. You're going to raise the priority. The third possibility is probably the most reasonable, and that is to maintain your practice, meaning that you decide you're going to allow some of your other priorities to come in a larger way and embrace the meaning of the season, that we spend more time with our family, more time with our friends, more time spiritually, and allow for that to remind us of what's important. No matter which one of the three that you choose, the most important thing is that you be intentional about it. Know what the outcome is that you want and why, and then you'll be able to go into the holidays with a lighter heart. So once that's done, of course, you need to schedule it. And scheduling is a little bit more complicated maybe than we get a bit credit for, because scheduling is not just writing it on your calendar, but then communicating with the people who are important to you in your life about the needs of that moment in your calendar. And then the third is to make sure that you reflect on the benefit of what you've decided to do intentionally. And that will help you to maintain a sense of perspective through the holidays. Okay, so taking a break. I want to say that this, as a musician, is a weird thing to taking a break, because most of us wouldn't really even dream of taking a break on purpose. But I want to just at least talk about it for a moment, because it is healthy to take a break and to put everything down and to let other priorities come up. But I also want to recognize that it brings up stuff, because musicians, we love what we do so much that oftentimes we do it in place of things that are unpleasant to us. And oftentimes that involves taking care of ourselves and talking to friends. So why do it? And then what are the benefits? I'm just going to list a few really off the top of my head, but I think that the benefits actually are infinite to taking a break. The first thing is to give yourself ample time to reflect on what you've been doing all these years, or if you're a new practice, or even all these weeks. It's much easier to reflect on a period of weeks than it is on a period of years, and so taking breaks in some ways can make it, I think, a lot easier. Another is to allow the other priorities in your life to find their place, and to perhaps remember that relationships and people are all we've got. How are we going to take a break that is intentional? I think that's the really big thing, to decide that we're just not going to play for 2 weeks without a plan for re-entry, and without taking a good look at the calendar to make sure that we are deliberately putting higher priorities into the time that we would normally be practicing, so that it doesn't just fill up with a bunch of extra stuff, as our schedule can do. So, just a few suggestions for your schedule. Notice what you have coming up. It's probably not a good idea to schedule a break when you have a concert the following week. That's not a great idea. But to realize that you may need some extra time to build your playing back up. So maybe be careful not to plan too many high pressure performances anywhere near a break. And then, of course, it's important to choose a time when that break is finished, with an understanding that it's going to be hard to come back to the practice. It's always hard to reintroduce a discipline. And we're going to know that going in when we take the break, that the reason that we're afraid to do it is because we're worried that we'll lose control of it. But if up front we're able to plan out these things in advance, then I think it makes for a very soothing period of time, knowing that you'll be coming back to it eventually. So, how should you communicate with the people around you when you're taking a break? I think it's maybe just at a very base level, very wise to let people know, particularly people who are relying on you and your playing, to let them know that you're planning to take a break and will be unavailable for a period of time. I recommend that if you're going to take a couple of weeks off, that you should plan between 2 and 4 weeks to come back. So taking a couple of weeks off means that I wouldn't plan any kind of serious work for maybe 1 or 2 months. And then it's very important to continue to reflect on what you're doing. If you don't reflect in an intentional way, it's easy for us to fall back on feeling like we're being lazy and like this time off is a waste of time, rather than something that we're deliberately doing to bring about the desired outcome that we thought about before we went through the season. So I think it's really important to think about all the benefits that come from taking a break. There are so many benefits, but also to make sure that we're not ignoring the fact that, of course, there are going to be some negative side effects. Playing a musical instrument requires subtlety in our musculature. And so if we stop for a period of time, we're going to feel it. So there is going to be that feeling when you come back, like you've regressed a little bit, because you have. So to be able to handle that is going to allow for another opportunity, which is to maybe build back your technique in a way that's a little bit more kind, a little bit more thoughtful. But it is a side effect that you have to be ready for. You shouldn't expect that you can just take the time off and have it not affect your playing. Okay, so let's go with perhaps the other side of the spectrum. Someone who has decided for the holidays, for whatever reason, that their practicing is actually going to take an even higher priority than it did during the regular season. If this is something you're going to do, you want to be super clear on the why. And I can't mention all of them because everyone has their own individual reasons for wanting to strategize during the holidays. Here are some possible whys. One is that you have a really important performance coming up, and the holidays is your only chance to really get the extra hours that you need. Another reason is just that you love it so much, and that any chance to spend more time with the instrument is something that you love to do. And I am someone who feels that way. So I understand the feeling, but I also have to admit to myself once in a while that essentially, if I'm trying to be disciplined, in other words, live a life in which I can be available to people and not obsessed with one thing, then I have to realize that there is some sprawl to ramping up your playing. And then I just want to mention, because also I think I was guilty of this, particularly as a young musician, is that ramping up our playing during the holidays is also a form of avoidance. And I am not saying that it's a negative thing necessarily. Some of us, for our mental health, need to avoid um, some of the situations that typically come up for us in the holidays. And so, having something that's not destructive, that has a quality of mindfulness and care to it, that you decide to spend more time doing that, I think in a lot of ways is a healthy avoidance. But to realize that it could be an avoidance, and that maybe you might want to think about being a little bit more moderate about how much you ramp your practice up if there's not a real external thing that's pushing you to do it. As you might imagine, ramping up your playing is probably going to take the most planning. And so I would say that you need a fair amount of time in that planning without the instrument next to you to figure out what is it that you are ramping your playing up for. Are you trying to gain technique specifically so that everything you play better? Is there a specific piece that you're trying to learn, et cetera, et cetera? What is the realistic goal that you are trying to hit in, say, the 3 weeks of the holiday season, that is going to make you feel a sense of satisfaction at the end? That's going to take planning the ramping up, and then planning the top of that ramp, and then I hope planning the other side of that time, which is to ramp down, to ease off a little bit, like any athlete or dancer would do. So if you're trying to ramp up, I think that's where you need to communicate perhaps the most. You need help if you're going to ramp. You need an accelerant. You need coaches, colleagues, friends, teachers, whatever you can find to give you the information that you need to start to build faster. And of course, you need to consider delegating, that there's no way that you can um, have a balanced life while you are deliberately trying to unbalance it so that you can get better quicker. You can't ramp up simply from deciding you're going to work harder for the hour that you have. It does have to be planned. When you reflect on ramping up time, it's very important to understand that the nature of it, that feeling your technique grow involves literal feeling of strength growing and a sense of moving into a new zone, and that zone is not permanent. You fall out of it as well, and that in some ways it's good to fall out of it and then move back up into it again, and to make sure that, again, that you're reflecting carefully with a coach, a private instructor, colleagues, friends, etc., to help you to make sure that the reflection is helping you to maintain clarity about what your goal was in the first place. And then, of course, negative side effects. So one of the most obvious ones is that you could hurt yourself. So if you ramp up your practice without careful understanding of how the body works and how you add to a physical routine over time, you're going to run the risk of hurting yourself. Tendinitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, the whole schmagegi. The other is mental health, that when we spend more time, usually in isolation with practice, we wind up having to neglect other things. And that's everything from taking care of ourselves to being available to our loved ones. And that does really have an effect over time. So if we ramp up our playing, it's sort of in perpetuity, there is that risk that you will be ramping down your connections with others in perpetuity as well. Just like with anything else, shame comes into it too. That whether or not you're taking a break or trying to ramp up your playing, there's still this feeling of not good enough, never satisfied, and being lazy that can creep into our practice. So, to be aware, if you aren't improving as fast as you thought the time was going to provide you, it's important to be gentle about that and not decide that it's because you're not good enough or that you haven't worked hard enough in your life or whatever can come up, but to understand that even though you putting more hours in, you still have only so much production capability each day, and so you can only grow so much each day, which is just a little bit. And then finally, maintaining, and which I think to be the most reasonable of these intentional decisions over the holidays. And why is maintaining perhaps the best way you could go? It's a way of being able to keep priorities in line with minimal sacrifice. In other words, if you can find, you know, the same interval of time each day that you set up in advance, then there's a feeling of relief that comes from knowing it's there, and that regardless of how the practice goes, you know that you're getting it done. A deeper why for maintenance is that maintenance creates a type of improvement in ways that we don't talk about very often. When we're maintaining our playing, we have a tendency to go back to basics and to try to think about some of the building blocks of what we do. And that builds our technique in a deeper way than simply trying to maybe learn more repertoire or go in with the mentality of trying to gain ability. So, what's the most difficult thing about maintaining is that it is so easy to not do each day. It's such a subtle way of keeping with a practice that it's also very easy to skip. And so, to set up expectations of maintaining requires careful calendar use again, and then making sure that we understand that we're going to have to communicate with people about something that is subtle and therefore sometimes harder for people to understand. And we have to find a way to gently explain that to them. All this to say that it's also easy to take on a lot of extra stuff. And so learning to say no to lower value things to make sure you can maintain your playing, I think is a good exercise in general for maintaining your playing for long periods of time. Reflecting on maintaining the work that you do, in Rollin we call it assessment, is something that's very easy to skip every day. And I think it's one of the reasons that we lose discipline often, that we aren't able to hold on to it, is because we forget to assess properly, to reflect on the benefits of this kind of gentle approach to our playing. And so it makes it harder for us to remember to do it each day because we don't get that sense of real growth. So the more you reflect on the practice that you've done and allow yourself to put it away each day, the easier it is to take it out. And then a real maintaining practice will form. So, what are the negative effects for those of us who are really concerned with the quality of our playing? The negative effects are that we aren't necessarily at the top of our game when the holidays are over. We may have to go through a kind of ramping up period to make sure that whatever repertoire we need to have prepared is ready. The other side effect is, of course, with shame, we are worried that other people are working harder than we are. And here we are still practicing, but maybe not practicing hard enough. Um, and just to say that that's true, that there are people working harder than you over the holidays, but that they will have to feel the effects of that as well. And so to try to face those kinds of feelings with a reasonable response, which is that I am willing to sacrifice some of my ability to maintain my sanity and the closeness with the people around me. I think if we think very carefully about this, we'll realize that this is worth thinking about. Because at the end of the day, the reason we want to be good at this is for the benefit of others. And to remember that in order to understand those other people, we need to make time for them. So, how do you choose? Of course, this is up to you and what you want. But if we can carefully think about the outcomes based on our priorities and not on our anxiety, we're going to have a lot easier time during the holidays.